Jake Thompson wiped the sweat from his palms as the transport shuttle's engines powered down. Through the small porthole, he could see the massive structure of the Galactic Defense Academy floating in space like a metallic city. At 22, he was the first human ever accepted into the program, and he knew every eye in the galaxy would be watching his performance. The shuttle doors hissed open, and Jake stepped into the docking bay. The air smelled different here. Cleaner somehow, with a faint metallic tang that reminded him of hospitals back on Earth. Other passengers from various worlds were already moving toward the main entrance, their forms as diverse as anything from Earth's wildest science fiction movies. A tall, blue-skinned alien approached him with measured steps. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall, with elegant features and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of centuries. This had to be Commander Vel Nash, the Academy's head of training operations. "Cadet Thompson," the commander said, his voice carrying a slight musical quality that Jake found oddly soothing. "Welcome to Defense Academy Station, Kepler 442. "Thank you, sir," Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. He'd practiced this moment dozens of times during the long journey from Earth, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of speaking with an alien commander. Vel Nash consulted a translucent datapad, his long fingers dancing across its surface. "Your species profile indicates standard bipedal physiology, average muscle density for mid-range classification. Homeworld gravity listed as 1 standard unit." He looked up at Jake with mild curiosity. Typical parameters for a developing spacefaring race. Jake nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what half those terms meant. The gravity measurement seemed straightforward enough. Earth's gravity was just normal gravity, right? He followed the commander through corridors filled with beings he couldn't have imagined in his wildest dreams. They passed a group of tall, thin creatures with silvery skin and multiple arms, their movements graceful and flowing like dancers. Another group consisted of shorter, stockier beings with thick, armored skin and what looked like natural breathing apparatus built into their faces. Jake tried not to stare, but it was impossible not to feel like he'd stepped into a living encyclopedia of alien life. The training bay was enormous, easily the size of 3 football fields back home. The ceiling stretched up so high that clouds might form near the top. Dozens of cadets were already engaged in various exercises, their different body types creating a bizarre but fascinating display of athletic diversity. Standard training environment is maintained at 0.8 standard gravity units, Vel Nash explained as they walked. This accommodates the majority of species represented here, without causing undue stress to low-gravity world natives. Jake nodded again, though something felt odd as soon as he stepped onto the training floor. His feet seemed to bounce slightly with each step, and when he moved his arms, they felt lighter somehow, like he was moving underwater. He assumed this was just how artificial gravity worked on space stations. 2 cadets approached them. The first was tall and thin with green, segmented skin and compound eyes that reminded Jake of a praying mantis. The second was shorter but much broader, with 4 powerful arms and skin that looked like it could stop bullets. "This is Crix of the Zorathi system," Vel Nash said, indicating the mantis-like being, "and Thane from the Gorvok homeworld. They'll help orient you to Academy protocols." Crix's head tilted in what Jake assumed was a greeting. "Human physiology appears quite standard," the alien said, his voice creating a chittering sound that the universal translator converted into English. "Similar build to many mid-range gravity species we've encountered." Thane crossed his 4 arms and studied Jake with obvious curiosity. "Not like those heavy world warriors we sometimes get. They usually need special equipment just to move around in standard gravity." Jake smiled, trying to appear friendly despite his nervousness. "Just glad to be here. Looking forward to the training." The basic fitness evaluation began immediately. Jake found himself running laps around the enormous bay alongside cadets whose running styles ranged from the graceful leaping bounds of the Zorathi to the powerful, ground-shaking strides of the Gorvok. His own running felt strangely effortless, each step seeming to carry him farther than expected. The push-up test came next. Jake dropped to the floor and began the familiar exercise, counting off repetitions alongside aliens whose body structures seemed to defy physics. Some had multiple arms working in coordination. Others possessed unusual joint configurations that made the movement look entirely different from human anatomy. When he finished his set and stood up, Jake brushed the dust off his training uniform. The strange bouncy feeling persisted, making every movement feel slightly unreal, like he was performing under different physical laws than he was used to. He figured this was just part of adjusting to life in space. Decent performance, Crix observed to Thane. Nothing exceptional, but solid mid-range capabilities. He should fit in well with the other moderate gravity species. Jake smiled and nodded, completely unaware that his decent performance had just been achieved under conditions that would have left most species gasping for breath. 3 weeks had passed since Jake Thompson arrived at the Galactic Defense Academy, and he was starting to settle into the routine. Every morning brought new challenges, new alien faces to learn, and new ways to embarrass himself with unfamiliar technology. But he was adapting just like humans always did. Unfortunately, not everyone appreciated his steady progress. Senior Cadet Dex Corvani lounged in the observation deck overlooking Training Base 7, his scale green skin catching the artificial light. As a Thraxian, he stood nearly 7 feet tall with a reptilian build that spoke of predatory evolution. His yellow eyes tracked Jake's movement below as a human, went through his evening workout routine, completely alone and unaware he was being watched. 3 weeks, and he still thinks he belongs here. Dex hissed at companions, his forked tongue flicking out with disdain. Time our human friend learned his proper place in the academy hierarchy. Beside him, Vith clicked his mandibles in amusement. The insectoid was all sharp angles and thin limbs, looking like a walking stick insect that had learned to wear a uniform. His compound eyes glittered with anticipation. What did you have in mind? The usual newcomer treatment. Something more creative, Dex said, his clawed fingers drumming against the observation deck's railing. You know how these mid-range gravity species get when you increase the environmental pressure. They start gasping, stumbling around, calling for help like hatchlings. A third alien, Corex, shifted his bulk in the reinforced chair designed for his rock-like physiology. The granite folk were known for their practical jokes, though their sense of humor tended toward the crude side. Academy hazing ritual, he rumbled in a voice like grinding stone. Every class has seen it. Build character, they say. Dex's eyes gleamed with malicious pleasure. Exactly. And since our human friend trains alone most evenings, we'll have a perfect opportunity to provide him with some additional challenge. The plan was simple, elegant, and had been used on dozens of cadets over the years. The Academy's training bays were equipped with variable gravity generators, allowing instructors to simulate conditions from various worlds. Most species could handle slight increases, but everyone had their breaking point. The Thraxian had seen proud warriors from mid-range gravity worlds reduced to crawling when the pressure hit 1.3 G. The environmental controls, Vith said, understanding immediately. His thin fingers were already dancing over a portable hacking device, the kind officially forbidden but universally owned by senior cadets. Standard protocol bypass should give us full access to Training Base 7's gravity systems. Slowly ramp it up during a session. Dex continued, warming to the scheme. Start at standard 0.8 G, then gradually increase. Most species begin showing strain around 1.2 G. By 1.4 G, they're usually begging for mercy. Corex's rock-like features arrange themselves into what might have been a grin. Entertainment value aside, it serves an educational purpose. Better he learns his limitations here than during actual combat operations. The rationalization made them feel better about what they were planning. This wasn't cruelty. It was a learning experience. Every cadet had gone through something similar, and most looked back on it with grudging appreciation. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and knowing your limits could save your life. Should we record it? Vith asked, his technical skills making him the natural choice for documentation. Standard practice for training analysis. Of course, Dex replied, though his motives had nothing to do with training analysis, and perhaps broadcast the common room. Other cadets might benefit from observing human physiological responses under stress. The common room was the Academy's social hub, where cadets from dozens of species gathered to eat, study, and gossip during evening hours. It typically held 40 or 50 students, all of whom will be very interested in seeing how the Academy's first human performed under pressure. Vitha's device chirped softly, indicating successful penetration of the training bay's security systems. Environmental controls accessed. Gravity manipulation system online. Current setting, 0.8 G standard. Below them, Jake had begun his workout with a series of stretches, completely oblivious to the attention he was receiving. His routine was methodical, almost ritualistic, moving from flexibility work to cardio to strength training with the kind of consistency that spoke of military discipline. Begin recording, Dex ordered, settling back to enjoy the show, and start the common room broadcast. Let everyone see what happens when a human gets reminded of reality. Within minutes, screens throughout the common room flickered to life, showing Jake's solitary workout session. Curious cadets gathered around, many bringing snacks and drinks as if settling in for entertainment. Word spread quickly through the Academy's social networks, and soon dozens of aliens were watching with anticipation. Gravity increase commencing, it announced, his fingers poised over controls. Current setting, 0.9 G. Target parameters, gradual escalation to 1.5 G over 30 standard minutes. Dex leaned forward, his predatory instincts engaged. Let's see how tough humans really are when they can't hide behind their cute little speeches about determination and never giving up. The show was about to begin. The gravity indicator on Vitha's control panel flickered to 1G as Jake wrapped his hands around the climbing rope. In the observation deck, Dex leaned forward with anticipation, his yellow eyes fixed on the human below. This was the moment when most species would start to feel the difference, when their movements would become slightly more labored and their breathing would deepen. Jake pulled himself up the rope with smooth, powerful strokes. Hand over hand, his form remained textbook perfect. His legs wrapped around the rope in a steady rhythm, and his breathing stayed even and controlled. There was no pause, no hesitation, no sign that anything had changed in his environment. He should be feeling it now, Vith muttered, his compound eyes studying the readouts. 1G represents a 25% increase from training standard. Most cadets show some adaptation response. In the common room, alien cadets pressed closer to their screens. A female Zarathi named Zala clicked her mandibles nervously. Is the feed working properly? He looks exactly the same as before. Her companion, a bulky Gorvok called Thon, shook his massive head. Video feed is clear, but something seems wrong. At 1G, even our people start breathing harder during climbing exercises. Back in the observation deck, Dex's confidence remained intact. Patience. Humans are apparently more resilient than their files suggest. But everyone has a breaking point. The gravity indicator shifted to 1.1 G, then 1.2 G. This was the threshold where mid-range gravity species typically began to struggle. Their movements would slow, their form would deteriorate, and many would need to take breaks between exercises. It was basic physiology, proven across hundreds of different worlds and species. Jake reached the top of the rope and began his descent. His controlled lowering technique remained flawless, muscles working in perfect coordination. When his feet touched the ground, he barely paused before moving to the weight station. 1.2 G confirmed, but announced, a note of confusion creeping into his voice. This is where Altrian cadets usually request a break. Jake loaded his usual weights onto the bar. The same amount he'd been using for 3 weeks, no adjustments made. He lay back on the bench and began his first set of repetitions. The bar moved up and down with mechanical precision, his face showing nothing but focused concentration. 10 reps, 15, 20, his usual count, completed at his usual pace. The weights. Corex rumbled from his chair. At 1.2 G, those weights effectively increased by 50%. He should be struggling. But Jake wasn't struggling. He finished his first set, sat up, and took his normal 30-second rest. Then he lay back down and started his second set. Same weight, same form, same steady breathing pattern. 1.3 G, Dex announced, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Maybe humans just hide their discomfort better than other species. Jake completed his weight training and moved to the obstacle course. This was where the increased gravity should really show its effects. The course required jumping, crawling, climbing, and sprinting over varied terrain. Every movement would be fighting against significantly increased gravitational pull. Jake approached the first obstacle, a series of barriers he needed to vault over. His approach speed never varied. He planted his hands and swung his legs over each barrier with the same fluid motion he'd used every night for 3 weeks. 1.4 G, Viz reported, his voice now definitely worried. Systems are functioning normally. Gravity field is stable across the entire training area. The obstacle course continued with crawling sections, rope swings, and wall climbs. Jake moved through each challenge with his characteristic methodical approach. No stumbling, no slowing down, no visible effort that suggested he was fighting against increased gravitational force. Several alien cadets in the common room had stopped eating their snacks. They sat in growing bewilderment, watching something that seemed to defy basic physics. 1.5 G now, Dex said, though he sounded more confused and confident. The controls are working, right? The gravity field is actually increasing. Vic checked his instruments twice, then a third time. All systems show green. Gravity field is stable at 1.5 G throughout the training bay. That's nearly double the standard training environment. Jake reached the end of the obstacle course and stopped at the finish line. He lifted his wrist to check his chronometer, the same habit he'd maintained since his first day at the academy. His expression showed mild disappointment. He muttered to himself, loud enough for the audio pickups to capture. 2 seconds slower than usual. Must be getting tired tonight. Maybe I should get to bed earlier. The alien audience sat in stunned silence. In the observation deck, Dex's claws scratched unconsciously against his chair's armrests. This wasn't how the prank was supposed to work. At 1.5 G, most species would be crawling on hands and knees if they could move at all. But Jake had just completed his entire workout routine, as if nothing had changed, and his only complaint was being 2 seconds slower than his personal best. Something was very, very wrong with their understanding of human physiology. The gravity readout climbed to 1.6 G, and Dex felt his own breathing become labored just from the stress of watching. His scaled hands trembled slightly as he operated the controls, no longer from excitement but from growing panic. This wasn't supposed to be happening. Physics didn't work this way. This is impossible, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the station's life support systems. At 1.6 G, he should be flat on his back, gasping for air. Below in the training bay, Jake had moved to the combat practice area. He selected his usual training sword from the weapon rack, a balanced blade designed for general combat instruction. The sword should have felt significantly heavier in his hands, but he swung through a few test cuts with the same casual ease he'd shown since day one. Jake began working through his sword forms, moving against the automated training dummies that the academy used for combat practice. These mechanical opponents could adjust their difficulty based on the trainee's skill level, providing increasingly complex attack patterns as proficiency improved. His blade work was a thing of beauty. Each cut flowed seamlessly into the next, his footwork precise and controlled. The training dummies whirred and clicked as they moved to engage him, their mechanical arms swinging padded weapons in carefully programmed sequences. Jake parried, riposted, and attacked with textbook form. His movements showed no sign of strain, no indication that he was fighting against nearly double the gravitational force he'd experienced on his first day. If anything, his technique looked even more polished than usual. 1.7 G, Vic reported, his voice cracking with disbelief. The human is engaging in active combat practice under 1.7 G loading. In the common room, absolute silence had fallen. Cadets from a dozen different species sat frozen, snacks forgotten, watching something that challenged everything they thought they knew about physics and biology. A few had pulled out their personal data tablets and were frantically consulting their xenobiology textbooks. Corex, the granite-skinned alien who had helped plan this prank, shifted uncomfortably in his reinforced chair. My people evolved on a 1.4 G world, he rumbled quietly. At this gravity level, I would be struggling to walk, let alone fight. Meanwhile, Academy sensors throughout the station had been monitoring the unauthorized gravity fluctuations in Training Bay 7. Automated alerts had been pinging the instructor staff for several minutes, but it took time for busy administrators to realize that someone was conducting an unauthorized experiment on a live cadet. The training bay doors hissed open with a sharp pneumatic sound that echoed through the vast space. Commander Velnash strode in with the purposeful gait of someone who had dealt with cadet pranks before and was thoroughly unamused by them. His tall blue frame moved with liquid grace despite his obvious anger, and his compound eyes immediately fixed on Jake, who was in the middle of a complex sword combination against 3 training dummies simultaneously. "Cadet Thompson," the commander called out, his voice carrying easily across the training bay. Jake executed a perfect finishing move that would have impressed any swordmaster, then turned toward the commander. He lowered his practice sword respectfully and stood at attention, just as he'd been taught during his first week. "Yes, sir," Jake responded, his breathing only slightly elevated from the combat exercise. Commander Velnash studied the human carefully. At 1.7 G, most species would be showing obvious signs of distress. Labored breathing, flushed skin coloration, trembling muscles, difficulty maintaining posture. Jake looked like he'd been exercising in normal conditions. "How do you feel?" the commander asked, his tone carefully neutral. Jake considered the question for a moment, running a quick mental inventory of his physical state. "Fine, sir. Maybe a little sluggish tonight, but nothing major. Might be fighting off a cold or something." Velnash felt his compound eyes widen in disbelief. He pulled out his command tablet and checked the current environmental readings for Training Bay 7. The gravity indicator showed 1.7 G and still climbing. At this level, most Academy cadets would require immediate medical attention. A horrible suspicion began forming in the commander's mind. "What is your homeworld's gravity exactly?" "Earth," Jake replied, seeming confused by the question. 1 G, sir. Same as anywhere else, right? I mean, that's just normal gravity." The blood drained from Velnash's blue face, leaving him an alarming pale shade. In the observation deck above, Dex's claws froze completely over the control panel as a terrible realization hit him like a physical blow. 1 G meant 1 G in standard galactic measurements, not 0.8 G like the Academy's training standard. The human had been operating in reduced gravity this entire time. What they had recorded as his average performance had actually been him working at diminished capacity. Jake had been struggling with the increased gravity because he was finally experiencing something close to the conditions of his homeworld. The Academy's standard training environment had been too light for him from the very beginning. "Turn it off," Velnash ordered sharply into the communicator, his voice tight with urgency. "Shut down the gravity manipulation immediately. Now!" But the damage to galactic assumptions about human capabilities had already been done. The emergency session convened in the Academy's largest conference room within 3 hours of the incident. Department heads from across the galaxy materialized as shimmering holograms around the massive circular table, their various forms creating a bizarre council of alien leadership. The room buzzed with urgent conversations in dozens of languages, all filtered through universal translators into a cacophony of concerned voices. Commander Velnash stood at the head of the table, his tall blue frame tense with the weight of what he was about to reveal. Behind him, massive display screens showed Jake's performance data from the past 3 weeks, complete with detailed analysis charts and comparative metrics that painted a picture no one in the room was prepared to see. Jake himself sat in a chair at the center of the room, looking deeply uncomfortable as alien officials whispered among themselves and pointed in his direction. He kept shifting in his seat, clearly wishing he could be anywhere else in the galaxy. The young human had no idea that his evening workout had just triggered the biggest military reassessment in galactic history. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings," Commander Velnash began, his voice carrying clearly through the room's advanced acoustic systems. "We are gathered here because we have fundamentally misunderstood human capabilities, and the implications are staggering." Admiral Kess, a massive Gorvok whose species was renowned for their physical prowess, leaned forward via hologram from his flagship somewhere in the outer rim. His 4 arms crossed over his barrel chest as he studied the data with growing disbelief. "Explain, Commander." Velnash activated the displays, showing Jake's workout footage alongside comparative data from other cadets. For the past 3 weeks, Cadet Thompson has been training in our standard 0.8G environment. We classified his performance as average for a mid-range gravity species. The room fell silent as the implications began to sink in. However, Vel Nash continued, his voice growing more serious. Today's unauthorized gravity manipulation revealed the truth. The human was exercising below his natural environment. What we recorded as average performance was actually him operating at reduced capacity. Jake watched the alien officials process this information, their various faces showing expressions he was learning to recognize as shock and concern. He still didn't fully understand why everyone seemed so upset about the gravity thing. When environmental gravity reached 1.7G, Vel Nash pressed on. He showed no degradation in combat effectiveness. In fact, his sword work appeared to improve. Admiral Kess's 4 hands clenched into fists. You're telling me their entire species conducts basic training under higher gravity than our Academy standard? It appears so, sir. A Zerathi official, her mantis-like form trembling with agitation, spoke up from her hologram. This changes everything. Our entire threat assessment protocol for emerging species assumes they develop under similar environmental pressures to the galactic average. Jake had been listening to this conversation with growing confusion, and finally worked up the courage to raise his hand. The gesture looked almost childlike in the midst of this high-level military conference, but it immediately captured everyone's attention. Excuse me, he said tentatively, his voice barely above a whisper in the large room. All eyes turned to him, dozens of alien gazes focusing on the young human, with sudden intense interest. Could I maybe request training in Earth normal gravity? Jake asked, looking directly at Commander Vel Nash. The current setting feels kind of floaty, like I'm moving underwater or something. I think I could do better with proper weight behind my movements. The room fell into absolute silence. Not even a hum of the life support systems seemed to register as every being present processed what they'd just heard. The human wasn't asking for lighter gravity to make his training easier. He was asking for heavier gravity because the current environment felt too easy. Admiral Kess broke the silence with a sound that might have been laughter if it hadn't been so bitter. By the void, they've been handicapped this entire time. Over the following days, word of the incident spread through galactic military channels like wildfire. Emergency sessions were called in capital cities across hundreds of worlds. Military strategists worked around the clock, recalculating threat assessments and defensive plans based on this new understanding of human capabilities. 3 months later, the official revision came through. Human military assessment ratings were increased by 340% across all categories. The species that had been classified as moderate development potential was suddenly reclassified as extreme caution advised. Jake, meanwhile, finally got his 1G training environment. The difference was immediate and dramatic. Within his first week of training under Earth normal gravity, he broke the Academy's record for the obstacle course. The following week, he shattered the sword combat assessment scores. His weightlifting numbers climbed so rapidly that instructors had to recalibrate the equipment twice. Other cadets began requesting permission to observe his training sessions, watching in awe as he performed feats that their species considered superhuman. Jake became something of a celebrity around the Academy, though he remained completely oblivious to the broader implications of his presence. When interviewed about his record-breaking performances, Jake would typically shrug and say something like, "I guess I'm doing okay. Still feels pretty average to me, though. I mean, this is just normal gravity." The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson about making assumptions, and Jake Thompson had inadvertently become the most carefully studied cadet in Academy history. He still just wanted to be a good soldier.